Welcome to A Court of Transformation and Awakening. I'm Lorrie Gray.
And I'm Amanda Grace Harrison.
And today we are discussing Book 1, Chapter 2. All right, so in Chapter 2, Feyre's bringing home her kill.
Gosh.
She's killed a deer. She's killed a wolf that she suspects may not have been a wolf, but has convinced herself it was a wolf because that makes her feel better. And now she brings it home. And in Chapter 2, we get to meet Feyre's family and get some insights into the family dynamics happening there, which I would not label as particularly healthy.
No. But then again, we can all relate. Who has healthy family dynamics? I don't know. I don't know anybody.
Oh my goodness. So there's so much in this chapter that we could dive into in terms of family dynamics. Yeah, so let's see what some stuff that stood out. Okay, first one for me. I believe she was talking about Elaine. I didn't write this in my notes, but she said, I'd never been able to decide whether she actually didn't understand that we were truly poor or if she just refused to accept it. And there's another passage in here about acceptance at the very end that I kind of want to come back to. But one of the questions that came up for me, and I was actually reading somebody else talking about some later, oh gosh, where was this? I don't know, guys. It was online somewhere. I'll link to it inside of our group, but somebody who wrote a really fantastic article about Feyre's relationship with Nesta and Elaine in particular. And they call back to a lot of moments like this where it can feel like Nesta and Elaine from the get-go are sort of the bad guys because Feyre's out there hunting. Right. She's out there doing the work and they're at home. But there's also a truth here of like, she doesn't know the answer to this because she hasn't asked.
Yeah, I know. Like, do you not know that she could just ask her?
She could just ask.
Why doesn't she ask her?
But
do you know the report?
I'm guessing that she's doing what so many of us do, which is like, well, they wouldn't answer me anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Where we like fortune tell and we pre-decide like, well, if I answered, they wouldn't be honest or it wouldn't work. And so then we don't know. And so then we make up the things and there's all this drama. And she may be right. Like maybe if she asked, she wouldn't get an honest answer. Maybe. But you don't know unless you ask. But anyways, it was just making me think about communication and how much drama people experience from a lack of clear communication.
Almost all of it. Almost like all the problems in the world. Lack of clear communication. All of the really relational problems. I mean, obviously, no. There's just actions that have been done that whether or not they were clearly communicated about, they were wrong. So there's that. But then most of it is just miscommunication or not communicating or whatever it is. But drama unfolds.
There is so much of it. And it just with this, I'm like, right, like but I think about my life, I'm like, how often are there situations where I'm spending a ton of energy trying to figure out why people are doing something instead of just asking because I want to avoid that discomfort.
Yeah.
But it's not really helping. Though I did have a conversation with a client the other day in a group session, and she was talking about sort of like how some people do really direct communication and how some people do indirect and sort of what they've experienced in life to lead them to do that. And that most people, if they communicate directly or indirectly, that there are reasons why they do that. And usually it's them trying to deal with their own lack of safety or making other people feel safe. And if you have somebody who's a direct communicated with somebody who's an indirect, they can feel like threatened and cornered, and or in a reverse, it can feel manipulative. It's really fascinating to look at communication. But again, I'm always like, can I just understand why I do this without judgment? And instead of what's objectively right, wrong, can I understand why I communicate the way that I do? But yeah, not a lot happening in this family.
No, there isn't a lot of great direct communication happening. Well, Nesta has some very direct communication, but it's not healthy.
Exactly. Well, and I mean, and that's okay. So let's talk about like why we don't do this, right? Like, why don't we ask those questions? And I think what we see here is, and she owns it. Like in another passage, she says, some days I couldn't tell which of us was the most wretched and bitter. And so we're looking at this thing and it's like, nobody's really happy. Nobody's really liking what's going on. And yet there is a homeostasis. And I think with most families, even if the dynamics are unhealthy, people know their place, they know their role, and we know how to keep walking out what's going on. And even if it's painful, and even if we don't like it, it's familiar, and we know what roles we play.
Is it predictably bad? It's at least predictable.
It's predictable.
It's not like, oh, it might be good, but then it's going to be bad. It's like better not to live with the hope of things going good. If they can just be predictably bad, then at least we know what's going to happen. We know she's going to say this, and then he's going to say this. And
yeah. And she, in this, we get to just see this one evening with them together. But what we're seeing is like, there's just so much of this that's repeat pattern. Like, this is what they've been experiencing for years. We get one night of it, but it's those dynamics and those patterns playing out over and over again. And I think that's why it's so hard for people who choose to be cycle breakers.
Yeah.
Even though they're trying to move towards something that's healthier, it absolutely disrupts the family dynamics in such a huge way.
Yeah.
And a way that is uncomfortable. And I know so many people, the idea of moving into a healthier way of doing life sounds good on the surface, but then when you get right down to it, it's so uncomfortable.
It's terrifying. Yeah. It's like our very, you do so much work with nervous system. Like our nervous system knows, like we're breaking status quo. No,
yes.
Like this is scary. Even if it's not scary, if it's just something, there's no tiger coming out of the woods at us, but we're experiencing a fight or flight because of this is different.
Yes. I think honestly, whenever I look at work, so, whenever I coach people, we do whole brain coaching, right? So it's, I do mindset work, like emotional limbic system work, and then nervous system work. And I do think we have to address all of them. But most cycle breaking stuff, most family dynamic stuff, the biggest thing to overcome is the nervous system, because so people are going to have their individual things that they're dealing with, like actual traumas, actual family dynamics, actual things that they specifically have had imprinted onto their nervous system. But then I think that as I study just how human brains are wired, we are all wired for tribal, like we're safe within the tribe.
Yeah. Anything
that the nervous system interprets as a form of rejection automatically goes to I'm unsafe. And not like it genuinely, when it's nervous system, it's like I'm going to die. Like I'm actually going to die if this happens. But I mean, historically, you don't have to go back very far before that was actually what was true of humans. Like being rejected by your family, like upsetting the people in authority over you. It actually did mean being ostracized. It actually did mean genuine, actual, literal death or persecution or horrific things. And so I think I see a lot of people and they're doing like a thinking brain override, and they're in unnecessary judgment because they look at that and they're like, well, that's silly. I'm not actually going to die, right? Like I'm not actually going to die. Like my mom's going to be mad at me. Big deal. And they use it as this way of like really being against themselves. But that's not how nervous systems work.
Yeah.
And we're carrying trauma from several, generations back where your nervous system really does think if you break the status quo in a way that upsets your family of origin, it genuinely interprets that as we're all going to die.
Yeah. That gives me a visual from another fantasy series, Lord of the Rings, when he says, it does not do to leave a dragon out of something. It does not do to leave it will not do to leave a dragon out of your calculations if you live near one. And that our nervous system is this dragon that it doesn't do to just go, oh, it's not true, because we still have this active dragon inside of us that will roar to life if we steal its gold, or in this case, upset the status quo. It knows that it needs to come in there and set things right. So we can't just ignore that we have the nervous system. We can't ignore that we have this inner dragon.
But so many people do. And I think that's, whenever I look at, I feel like when people ignore their limbic system, that's when we end up in burnout. But people who ignore their nervous system, I think that's whenever I see people in like those places of chronic stress, like people can genuinely get to a place where their nervous system is actually dysregulated and it's not working the way that it's supposed to anymore because it gave a signal and we were like, shh, be quiet, you. That doesn't make sense. That's not logical. We're not actually unsafe. And people try to just power through. Suck it up and drive on. Tape it and play. Push through. Push it down. And I don't know for everybody else, but I think for so many of us, it's those of us who were told that we were too much, we were too sensitive. We experienced gaslighting of some sort, and then now we do it to ourselves and we don't honor all of that. Yeah, but it'll come back and bite you if you try to not factor that into cycle breaking and any sort of growth work.
Yeah. Which I thought was interesting because I think of Feyre, like overall, when I finish how much I've finished of the book, I'm like, she needed some better self-care practices. But then I see her right here on the second page of the chapter. I took a calming breath as I slung the dough off my shoulders because here's the family battering her. Where did you get that? Where do you think I got it? She's saying. But she takes a calming breath, which is really good. I'm like, good for you, Feyre. You took a calming breath. That's important.
Right. Well, because she had to.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thing, too, because if you, like we're talking about, if you don't manage the nervous system, it gets to a place where it's completely dysregulated. But she had to learn to manage her stress responses because if she didn't, they didn't eat. Because she had to be calm enough to be able to fire a bow and arrow to actually, get dinner. And, it is in the midst of talking about how, this nervous system work is so important. It is good to know that there are self-regulating practices. Like there are things that we can do to regulate the nervous system over time. And I mean, I'm one of those people. I identify as, or did, somebody whose nervous system is hypervigilant. So like my nervous system got stuck in fight or flight where it genuinely thought everything was unsafe. And it's like you hear a noise and my heart rate would like jump up, like every noise, safe noises, but just I was sensitive to noise and, any sort of stimulus. But it got to the place where almost anything I did in my life felt unsafe. Like somebody was like, I mentioned that to somebody sometime. They're like, give me an example. What do you mean when you say like everything's unsafe? I'm like, posting on Instagram, sending an email, buying things, talking to other humans. And they're like, wait, like all humans? I'm like, yes, like all humans. Every bit of that felt unsafe. And my nervous system got to the point where almost anything I did in my day, I was having this state of like, I'm actually unsafe and carrying that around constantly.
That just feels exhausting just hearing about it. Like my whole body, I'm like, I just need to go get a massage and shake it out.
Well, and that's why, chronic fatigue. I had chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. I rested more than almost anybody that I knew, and I was never rested because my brain and my nervous system were never at peace. And so even if I was asleep, there was a part of my brain that was always in fight or flight and always active. And so I was exhausted all the time. It was really, really not a pleasant state to be in. And, it's taken a lot of years to work with my nervous system, to work on self-regulating practices, to get to that place where my nervous system is not in that state of hypervigilance all the time. Really glad to report that is a thing that we can do. It's not an overnight thing. It's not a quick thing. But yes, for the most part now, I am more regulated. But when I go to move into a state of personal growth, okay, and even like right now, I'm in a season of taking up more space, breaking out of cycles. And it gets triggering. And the work is not just mindset work. It's not just what's my to-do list and can I power through it. I'm having to partner with my nervous system.
And that's such a beautiful image, partnering.
Yes.
With your nervous system.
That's always the language that I like to use. Because most people say like managing, or like how do I like quiet it? How do I
control it?
How do I
It's so beautiful.
Well, because and I think it was that understanding that it's a useful part of my brain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, Feyre out in the woods, like the nervous system and the fight or flight response and the ability to react in an instant to keep her alive. It's there for a good reason. Now, mine got a little short circuited here and there, but like ultimately, it's a good thing that's just there for my good. And at the very least, working with it, not against it, always gets us further.
Yes.
Okay, so that was a really long tangent from cycle breaking.
We're really big on tangents.
But the Feyre here, yeah, so we see
tangents.
but we see family dynamics here that are not good. But everybody knows their roles. Yeah. And when we decide to break out of those roles, it is complicated, it is nervous system work, it is not easy, and it upsets the dynamics for sure.
It does.
Okay, now I had one more at the end, but what else was coming
I just
up for
noticed
you?
at the very beginning, I couldn't help not noticing this when she says she hears her sisters as she's coming up the path. She already hears her sisters inside. And she said, I didn't need to discern their words to know they were most likely chattering about some young man or the ribbons they'd spotted in the village when they should have been shopping with. That just took me straight to Kitty and Lydia from Pride and Prejudice, which I'm a big Pride and Prejudice fan. So I was like, she actually mentions ribbons. So that instantly, like, this is the first time we're seeing, before we even see them, I already have this image of Kitty and Lydia. I'm like, oh my gosh, these are going to be just silly. And then, of course, Nesta is nothing like that once you get to know her. But that's the first image is, oh, these silly sisters were just in there chattering about boys and ribbons.
Boys and ribbons. So, oh my gosh, that's a title for something. I don't know. It's a title for
boys and ribbons.
Boys and ribbons. Boys and ribbons. We'll use it for something. Yeah, seeing her relationship with her sisters, and there's so much more. I don't want to talk too much about that right now, but there's so much ongoing stuff in the books about those relationships that I find so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else for you?
I did like that she, when she goes into the fact that they did have that one easy summer. They had been really wealthy, then they lost all their money, and then they had this one summer when there was some extra money. So I like that, where it's like, okay, it hasn't been like, she wasn't raised in a hovel. She had this other life. And then now that's almost part of, like, it takes us back to her ordinary world before that. So we see that this ordinary world that she's living in now is a downgrade from what she was born into. When she had a mom and she had a big house and they were wealthy. And now she's got no mom, no money, no food. She's having to take care of it. And even though she's the youngest, she's the one who... The mom made promise that she was going to take care of everybody after the mom died. That's all different.
And that part, I'm glad you brought that up, that she mentioned that here, because that comes up a number of times. Like that idea that she made this promise to her mom and that she feels so bound by this promise. It really does affect a number of her choices in the future. And, now this one, they made it so overt, right? It's a deathbed, it's a promise, it's that kind of thing, right? And I don't think most people have that dramatic of a thing, but that's totally why a lot of us don't break out of cycles, because it's sort of it's an understood on some level, this idea of like, no, but I do have this responsibility to my family.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. The idea that because my parents gave birth to me and kept me alive and raised me, I therefore owe them. Mm-hmm. Can we just stop? Can we just stop for a moment and just point out that doesn't make a lick of sense? Like, I'm just going to, like, if anybody is dealing with that, like, I did not ask to be conceived or born.
That you know of.
That I know of. Now, I get, like, I know that there are other people who have different beliefs about how the world works and, like, cycles of rebirth and whatever. Okay, based on the way that I see the world, I did not ask for this. I did not choose to have me be conceived. Mm-hmm. I didn't make anybody choose to keep me or raise me or any of those things. And the idea that this thing that I didn't choose, I now owe somebody for.
Well, and even if you had chosen it, you didn't force them into it. So therefore, they made the choice.
Their choices.
Whatever they chose.
Their choices. Yes. Parents, like my kids, I'm not going to be like, hey, yeah, so I decided to have sex and keep you and conceive you, and then like, but then because I had you, like I fed you and did all of these things, and now like you have to pay me back for all of that with, you know,
by doing whatever makes me happy.
Yeah, like by giving up on your dreams and goals because like I did that. I'm like, no, I did all of that because I chose to. And I get that there are circumstances where people end up, you know, that there are aspects of it and choices that can be taken away. But the idea that we owe our parents for bringing us into the world, I do not think is a healthy or helpful concept. And so but so many people, even though they don't have a deathbed promise thing, I think there are a lot of people who are not willing to step into what it is that they really want, to live their lives for themselves in a healthy way, to pursue dreams and hobbies, and to break cycles and do any of that, because it feels the same way. It feels like they've made a deathbed promise to somebody that they can't step out of, even though that's not really what happened. It's like I see people with the same level of connection, or yeah, the idea of growing beyond people. Like if I make more money than my family, if I become more successful than my parents, if I believe things that are different from them, like that's somehow betraying our family. And it's just not, guys. It's just not how it works.
No.
So I typically say, I'm like, you don't owe your parents anything. And people will argue with me. And I'm like, I'm still going to leave that at that. I get that there is nuance to it. But I make it a point to not live my life out of obligation. And there are plenty of things that I show up and do that I love to do for people. But if somebody told me like, hey, I did this thing for you because I felt obligated to, I'd be like, maybe don't next time.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want somebody to call me or give me something or serve me or help me because they felt like they were obligated to do so. Like, that doesn't feel like love for me. And I remember the day whenever I reversed it, and I'm like, oh, so maybe I don't do that to other people either?
Sounds like a plan. Obligation sucks.
It does. It does. But thank you for pointing that one out. That one was such a good one here. And these themes, they just get played out all the way as we go. Okay, last one for me was towards the end. So at the beginning, we saw this passage about, like, I'm not sure if she didn't know that we were poor or if she just wasn't accepting it. And then we see this theme of acceptance show up again at the end, where her father says, like, we need hope as much as we need bread and meat. We need hope or else we cannot endure. So let her keep this hope, Feyre. Let her imagine a better life, a better world. And Feyre comes back with, there is no such thing. And we have this dynamic between acceptance and hope, which I think most people pit against themselves. So we're looking at like Elaine and Nesta, who I think kind of what we're presenting is they are not accepting their situation. Like they're still living life as if they have not lost their fortune. So they've got hope. You know, Nesta's like this engagement to this Thomas Mandray, like as if it's like any normal proposal, as if it's not based on food. Like she's completely disregarding the reality of the situation for hope, right? And her dad's like, no, we need that. And he's right. But then we see Feyre. Okay, so what was I going to say? So the hope with a lack of acceptance, what we're seeing is it's leading her to make unwise choices. And like hope without accepting the reality of now, I think does lead to people making unwise and sometimes unsafe decisions.
And that goes with the whole harmful positivity thing.
Yes.
Like hope is a very positive thing. But if it's harmful because it leads you to gloss right over, yes, but we need to deal with this situation here. Like, yeah, there's hope. That's awesome. Things are going to be awesome. There's silver linings. But
yeah,
we can't jump straight to that.
Yeah. And on the other side, we've got Feyre, who does not have hope.
Nope.
No hope. And so she's very firmly in the, like, this is the reality of our situation, but without hope.
Yeah, she accepts it a little too much. Like, she accepts that this is the way it is and that this is the way it's always going to be. It's never going to be a better world.
Exactly. It's forever. It's, and she's projecting her current reality, which she is in acceptance of, onto the future and then being resigned about it. And when that's the case, it becomes a thing, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. When we believe things never can get better, we often make that true in how we show up today. So both of these things, but I see people do this too. Like I see, clients, and I think I've been in that state too of like, how do I want to say? It's like, it almost feels more intelligent to people. I've had people use this word that like they feel smarter and more intelligent if they're in that place of like, this is just how it is and it's always going to be. Like, and that hope feels like this silly, childish
so true, yeah,
thing.
So true. Yeah.
And it's like they feel like there is this, like, in being negative about the future, that they are somehow being more wise.
Yeah. Totally.
But that doesn't work well either. So we've got this contrast between hope without an acceptance of reality, and then we've got an acceptance of reality with hope, and neither work well. And one of the things that I had to work through for myself, so being a person with chronic illness, I'm wheelchair bound, I'm in horrific levels of pain all the time, and the doctor's like, you're gonna get worse, not better, like, welcome to your life, right? So guys, the conversation around acceptance and hope is one that I have like nitpicked apart for so long, trying to work this out and trying to find language around my experience, probably like way beyond what the average person needs. But I've thought about this a lot. And one of the most helpful things for me was recognizing that acceptance and hope are not incompatible. They absolutely can keep the same company because they're about different things. I'm like, acceptance has to do with the past and the present. What is, and hope is about the future. And we can absolutely be an acceptance of what is true right now and use that information to make wise decisions while also keeping hope for the future, because they're not about the same time frames. But when people tell me like, here's this thing about the future and I just have to accept it, I'm always like, hold up, red flag. That's not acceptance. That's resignation. That's something else. So I only for myself, and now I have seen places, or I've seen teachings about like accepting things that are future based. I get that some people can do that. So this is how I've made sense of it. But I only, for myself and for my clients, we only apply the word acceptance to factual things that have happened in the past, or factual things that are true right now. And part of what we accept is that the future is unknown. And that we do get to tell whatever story about it that we want. And also the idea of telling like this hopeful story about the future that doesn't come true. People are like, well, what if? But what if I have hope for this future thing and it doesn't happen? I'm like, okay, well, let's actually just play that out. So let's say you have a hope for something that will happen 10 years from now. And you spend 10 years hoping and feeling positive, and then you actually get to the day and it doesn't happen. Okay, so you feel disappointed. You felt positive for 10 years and hopeful, and then you were like disappointed for like when you got there. I'm like, I don't think you're going to necessarily look back and regret that unless you make it mean something horrible about yourself in the future, which you can control, and you can decide not to do that. You don't have to do that. But people are like, yeah, I think that I'll spend the next 10 years being disappointed in advance just in case I don't get there, because that feels really smart to me. I'm like, let's talk about how that's actually going to play out in terms of what happens over the next 10 years and how that becomes self-fulfilling prophecy and how we show up in those ways.
It's my dad.
You said that's your dad?
It's my dad in a nutshell. Bless his heart. That's so sad, but that's my dad.
I think that was me too, though. I think it's a lot of people because there's a part of it that feels like it makes sense. Like if I prepare myself for the disappointment, somehow I will be less disappointed then.
Yeah.
It's just that it doesn't actually work that way. Like we still feel just as disappointed then.
And now.
And now.
Disappointed now, disappointed then. Just become sadness. Back to inside out.
Back to inside out. Oh my gosh. I love the like, here's the circle of sadness. Just stay inside there. It's such a cute movie. Yes, but anyways, but this picture in the book and how these two things work best together. Acceptance and hope. Acceptance for what is, practical decisions in terms of, and again, back to that self-partnership word. If anybody works with me, they're like, I'm like, just start taking a tally of how many times I say self-partnership, like in coaching, because it's a lot. It's a lot. We talk about it a lot. We talk about it in a lot of different ways. But yeah, I'm like, what is actually true of you? Where is your nervous system actually at? Where are your strengths actually at? How is this working? Like what are the facts of reality? Can we be in acceptance with that? Can we partner with that as we aim towards the future instead of disregarding it or whatever it is that we do, or being in opposition with ourselves?
It's so important. So good. So good.
But if we can do that, we can get there, and we can keep both. You do not have to choose between bitter Feyre and what would be a word for Elaine and Nesta for where they're at. What is the word for that? For like not being an acceptance of reality, being.
It will come to us.
It'll come to us later. Somebody in the comments are gonna be like, "This is the word that you meant." Tell us in the comment what word we were. What we were looking for. But they can keep the same company.
At least I don't have to resort to running in the hay with Isaac Hale like an animal. That's what I'm just open to.
Oh, Isaac. We get to meet. There's a foreshadowing. Join us next episode where we meet Isaac Hale and get to talk about that some more.
Yes. Are we done?
Yeah.
Done. Thanks so much for joining us on A Court of Transformation and Awakening. And if you haven't already, make sure to go to ACOTAR, that's ACOTAA.circle.so, where you can not only watch these videos, but you can interact in the chats, or you can dive in deeper with one of our workshops or deeper small group adventures. We'll see you there, guys.
Bye.
Bye.